Don't go here Papa's having session.
Hi, everybody. Very, very apt for the plague, Swati. I have added. Okay, what is this? I've added a list of sources that I've referred to for this plague. Sorry, this talk. Go through that. The list is long. Of course, I've not gone through in detail. I've not gone through all of these in detail. I've taken things from each of these. So these, I mean, one of them at least, Kalpana Swaminathan Ishrat Ratna's Room 000 could be a good starting point. For me, the starting point, of course, was a movie called 22nd June 1977 by Jayu and Nachiket Patwardhan. But I mean, this is, I mean, as good as any. The book by Kalpesh Ratna. It's Kalpana Swaminathan and Ishrat Sayed. So I will also try and upload photographs on the comments side as I'm speaking, because I feel that a good talk would need some kind of visual representation. The only problem is that if I start sharing pics, or if I start sharing my screen, then I would not be able to revert to speaking, because I just have the PowerPoint slides going to and fro. So I've desisted from doing that. If we still have 2 minutes before the talk starts. Oops. Oh, so one can't post a pic in the comment section either. Good evening and hello to all those here, and to all those who would watch this at some point of time or the other. I am going to talk about the plague in Bombay, which is a part of the third pandemic, or the third plague pandemic. The first dated to the early centuries, the Christian era. The second was, of course, the Black Death. And the third was the one that started off in China in the 1850s. Of course, it came to Bombay in the 1890s. I'd also discuss why it is significant and why I have specifically picked up the topic. The latter, of course, because of the parallels that can be drawn between the plague, or rather the reaction, both of the people and the government to the current pandemic. This has been a sad, rather sad week, because in addition to the plague, not in addition to the COVID-19, sorry, not showing signs of abatement in a number of countries in the world, we've also lost a few prominent individuals. As far as Bombay is concerned, I can think of Irfan Khan and Rishi Kapoor. Calcutta, Chuni Goswami, I don't know if a lot of people are familiar. He was one of the first Indian football captains. He played football, both football and cricket for West Bengal. And in Delhi, we lost R.V. Smith. R.V. Smith was a non-academic chronicler of Delhi, and by saying that, what I want to stress is that his contribution to the history or the encounter, the stories of Delhi is much, much more than what conventional historians have been able to contribute. Going forward, why plague and why Bombay in particular is something that we're going to discuss. Bombay in the 1890s was the primary Indian city as far as the British were concerned. Very different from the 17th century pestilence-ridden swamp that they rather reluctantly got from the Portuguese by way of dowry. Over time, Bombay, like Surat or the other cities, was designed to work like a trading station, and therefore the successive governments acted as such, providing fortification, providing a certain amount of protection to the people who came there and stayed there. The policies were more liberal than their Portuguese neighbors, which also attracted a lot of people to Bombay, to what we now know as Bombay. And therefore, a large population across castes, creeds came and settled down in Bombay. And Bombay has a definitely longer history of its cosmopolitan character. In the 1850s, there are two important developments that happened that speeded progress in Bombay, and that sort of helped in bolstering its reputation as the primary city, or the Urbs Prima in Indus, which means the primary Indian city for the British, as far as the British were concerned. The first was the opening of a cotton mill in the mid 1850s, and then secondly, the railway connectivity. As far as cotton was concerned, the railways helped transport the cotton from the hinterland Bombay to the mills. Going forward in 1861, when the Civil War in America was declared, in the South, which was a bulk producer of cotton for the British, stopped exporting cotton, Bombay rose into prominence. Of course, this happened till 1865, when the Civil War ended, but then Bombay was still an important cotton exporting port for China, yarn to China, etc. So Bombay retained its prominence, though its economy did see some sort of recession during that period. Now, during that period, Bombay also saw a lot of construction, especially by Indian magnates and some by the Britishers, and of education institutions, etc. And Bombay slowly rose to, or strengthened its position of prominence. Now, in the 1880s and 1890s particularly, the hinterland of Bombay, or rather the areas surrounding Bombay, when I say Bombay, I mean the Bombay city, not the Bombay presidency. So places like Ratnagiri and all were facing some sort of famine. So people migrated from Ratnagiri and these nearby surrounding areas from the Konkan to Bombay to work as mill hands in mills, and this led to an increase in the population. So I think by 1890s, the population of Bombay was was in excess of 800,000. Now, how the plague came to Bombay is a mystery. We'll try and unravel it, probably not successfully. How plague came to Bombay is quite a mystery, but it was diagnosed in September by a doctor. Now, as we go along, there'll be dates and there'll be names, and I keep repeating this because there are always newcomers who there are always newcomers who join in. So please do not remember the names. No need to hang on to the dates. I have in the comment section provided a list of sources. Please feel free to refer to them. Most of them are available in the public domain. Okay, so on 18th September 1896, a doctor called Asesio Viejas, a doctor of Goan descent, practicing in Bombay, was taken to this place called Paidhoni. Paidhoni literally means to wash the feet. Paidhoni is very near. Paidhoni is very near a place called Apollo Bandar. I'm sorry, not Apollo Bandar. Paidhoni is very near Masjid Bandar and very near Mandvi, which is sort of lying on the sea. Now he was taken to inspect a lady who had fever, and he discovered a nodule on her body, or a swollen lymph gland, which he had never seen before in a person, and the symptoms indicated to a disease that he had read about, and he was afraid to spell out because he'd read about it. He'd read about it occurring in the 15th and the 16th century, and he thought it was almost impossible that it would occur in India. But in his mind, he had surmised that it was the plague. When he took it to other colleagues, they of course laughed at him, saying that it's just a boil, it's not the plague. But he did not give up, and after a couple of cases in the area, which he thought were endemic, he consulted another doctor called Dr. Surveyor, who took samples from these bodies, including a dead body, and studied them, and came to the conclusion, based on one by another scientist and bacteriologist by the name of Yersin, Alexander Yersin, and he correlated his findings and found that these were indeed the plague bacillus. They hit a wall, because the whole theory of the germs or bacilli causing diseases was new, literally newfangled, and they thought that there were these enthusiastic, and the older doctors thought that they were these enthusiastic youngsters who had latched on to this concept, which may or may not be correct, and then they had to oversell it. So they would dismiss anything. The senior doctor would dismiss anything that was associated with germs or plague or such. So therefore, to push this through, and to ensure that the plague was identified, and plague was identified as such, and the government took an action, Dr. Surveyor, again a Parsi, wrote in the Times of India, and something that would have otherwise been consigned to the back burner now became important city news. A committee was set up, and finally on the 30th of September 1896, 1896, I'm sorry if I said 1897, 1896, it was decided that the plague had finally come to Bombay. The thing was that the first two doctors, the one who diagnosed it clinically without having seen it before, and the one who identified it, the one who saw it clinically and the one who identified in laboratory without seeing it before, both of them were Indians. The work or the research into the plague started off by Indians. So though if you Google the Bombay plague, the first name that comes to you is that of Valdemar. The first name that comes up is that of Valdemar Halfkind. How and why, we'll discuss that as we go along. Now, when the government of Bombay wrote to the Governor General, the governor of Bombay, that Sandhurst, wrote to the Governor General at that point of saying there was plague happening, they also had to take steps towards it. Now, at first, the plague was concentrated in the area of Mandvi, and then a drive was launched to kill the rats, because they thought that the dying rats in that area were the ones that led to the plague. They sort of developed a tenuous connection, but not how the dying rats led to it. Sometime around the middle of October, in the beginning of October, actually October 6th, the governor of Bombay, the municipal commissioner of Bombay issued a notification with respect to the plague. Now, why is this notification significant? It is significant because, first of all, it dictates, or it represents, the entire tenor of the British administration towards the plague, and probably later administrations towards any epidemic. Because I can't memorize it, I'll just read out what is quoted in the notification. I've kept it somewhere here. The reason why I'm reading this out is because it's quite significant. What it says and why this is needed is because just a little bit on the significance. The whole reason, I mean, when I read this out, we'll understand. But the reason why this was passed, or why the tenor is such, is on account of the fact that it was always thought that we as native Indians were indisciplined, unclean, lived in unsanitary conditions, and we would only understand discipline. Therefore, the response to plague was not improvement in public health, but rather improvement in regulation. Now, I read this out. On October 6th, the municipal commissioner issued a notification empowering any officer to break open and forcibly enter any building or parts thereof without prior notice to the owner or the occupier. This was not even done in the Black Death Great Plague in England 3 centuries ago. To clean and disinfect the same and cause forcible removal of and disinfection and destruction of any grain, bedding, clothing or goods. Any person suffering from the bubonic plague, whether with proper lodging or accommodation or shall or not, shall liable to be removed forcibly to any hospital or place at which patients suffering from the said disease are receiving medical treatment. Every house where the disease or disease exists or existed shall be isolated, and if necessary, the commissioner or the municipal police officer can prevent forcibly persons entering or exiting the house. Now, yes, Hafkind Institute is named after Waldemar Hafkind. Absolutely. So now, this was the British response, in the sense that they were forcibly evicting, they were getting people out of houses, they were entering houses, they were disinfecting houses, they were destroying belongings of people, they were demolishing houses, whitewashing them, then putting a red mark all around it and calling it UHH, or unsafe for human habitation. So this was the British response to plague. Why? Because first of all, like I said, it was posited on the fact that they believed that we Indians understand only discipline. Secondly, the plague was caused and spread on account of unsanitary conditions. Later on, another thing happens, which also, I mean, a rather large development takes place in Bombay, also based on the same premise. But there is nothing that they are doing to further scientific investigation or development into the plague, which is handled at this point by a couple of Indians. That is, like I said, Dr. Surveyor, then Asayas Viegas, another person called Hankin who comes from Agra. They all are working the public health with danda since forever. Absolutely. Was the plague caused by rats? Yes, it's called the bubonic plague as opposed to the pneumonic plague. Pneumonic plague is the one. Bubonic plague is the one that is caused by rats, which is more common on this side. The pneumonic plague is the one in the lungs, which is more common at that time in Central Asia and Mongolia. Going forward, so at that point of time, in a room in the Petit laboratory, Petit after a Parsi, not petit in French, which means small. Petit, in the Petit laboratory, these people were assiduously working to conclusively establish what the plague was about. I mean, the plague was all about finding out reasons, how to spread it. That was done on an individual level, while the administration was, like someone said, taking care of public health with danda since forever. So that was what was happening. On October 6th, when the notification came out, the English administration, Bombay, also invited a person called Waldemar Hafkind. Now, Hafkind was a Jewish person from Odessa who moved to Pasteur Institute in Paris, and then after a stint there, he had come to Calcutta. He was credited with the discovery of the vaccine for cholera, along with a number of others, and he was in Calcutta to test and implement. The same in Asian countries. So he moved from Calcutta to Bombay to the laboratory the laboratory called the Petit laboratory in the Grant Medical College, attached to the JJ Hospital, and in a room along with a corridor called room 000 in Kalpesh Ratna's book, and that's how the whole search for a vaccine in Western media starts, because till then it was being done by Indians, so that could be discounted. Because if you read a number of publications in 97 and 98, including the Tropical Medicine Journal, British Medical Journal, you will find that Hafkind, along with 3 assistants, who helped him, was responsible for the vaccine anyway. They started working in 2 directions. One, to identify how the plague was caused, and secondly, or a vaccine. So going by what how he had seen pasture work and how cholera had how the vaccine for cholera had evolved, they tried to take the live organisms from the rat, culture them, attenuate them, remove the virulence or the thing that caused death, and create a vaccine based on that. This took about 3 months. That is till January 10th. Now, what was happening in Bombay at that time was more interesting. Of course, there was a lot of hard work going on, but after the October 6th notification, where it said that people can enter forcibly, etc., uh, the administration went gung ho full swing. So they would the their cure, as far as the administration was concerned, of course, was to improve. Yes, Robert Koch was also there at Grant Medical College. Absolutely. Uh, what the administration did was they would use a solution of the perchloride of mercury, common salt, and water, about 30 gallons of them. Mix it, which was noxious, which would emit fumes and was poisonous. Wash the house of someone suspected or affected by the plague. Bleach. They then wash the house with bleach. That is still done, of course. People as well as buses have been indiscriminately bleached sometime last month. So houses were bleached. The belongings of people were thrown out onto the streets, furniture, clothing, etc. Burnt. The houses were stamped with UHH or um, uh, unsafe for human habitation, and they were locked up and the dread circles drawn. So there were a number of things that were happening. First of all, the whole concept of segregation was, according to people of different religion, against their religious tenets. Hindus, that is the upper caste, considered it against their caste strictures, that they could not mix with people. The Muslims, of course, said it was violative of pardas, especially when most of the doctors were men, and the patients could be either men or women. In addition to that, there was a lot of social stigma attached to this. That is, I mean, it is a little to do with what the Britishers called Eastern thought, in the sense that the plague or the visitation of a plague on you was a result of your own acts in your past, and therefore it was a punishment for what? So punishment for that. So there was a social stigma to the people who had plague. After all, because there was no cure for it and no vaccine for it, people anyway stayed away from you. In addition to that, there was a social stigma of you having done something in your past life that had led to this condition. So as the plague progresses and as the cure is found, there is a slight tilt or a movement from Eastern medicine towards Western medicine and acceptability, but we'll come to that later. So the plague, this is what is happening during the plague, in the sense that the British government gets policemen, get army men. The people are chaw booked. That's the word that the Plague Commission uses, CHAWBUCKED, from the word chabuk or whip. So they were chaw booked and forcibly thrown out of their houses into segregation. Now this led to complications. Obviously, there was this massive assemblage of 1,000 mill workers outside one of the hospitals where most of the plague cases were being treated. I say treated because I say treated, but the word the doctor Nasrwanji Chinoy, who's in charge of the hospital, uses is waiting for them to die. So there was a huge outcry against this, because people said that the Britishers wanted the bodies of Indians. Yes. The word mercurial also comes from there. So it was Chawbucked, CHAWBUCKED, which is Chabukt in Hindi, if that would be a Hindi word. Anyway, so then there was this huge rally, and people started stoning the hospital, the Arthur Road Hospital, which was the makeshift infectious disease hospital, because they felt that the people were being brought there to die and to harvest their organs, or because it was a revenge taken by the British against the garlanding of Victoria's statue with slippers and tarring her face, whatever be the case. They started hurling stones till the siren of the nearby factories rang, and they went back to the factories. This, of course, perturbed the administration. But what perturbed the administration more was the growing resentment among what the administration. How did they identify a place as UHH? There was no, okay, now there is no threshold of contamination. But come to this discussion later. If I don't, please remind me again. So what irked the administration more was a discontent among whom they referred to as halal khors. They were from the depressed classes. They were sanitation workers who, if they went on a one-day strike, Bombay would end up Bombay would end up in a really bad condition. So when the municipal commissioner of Bombay, Snow, heard that the halal khors were deciding to leave the country, leave the state, leave the city, and go on a strike, he promptly, on the 30th of October, withdrew the notification, which had given wide-reaching powers to the officers of the municipality and the army and the police to enter, raid, search. But the harm had already been done, and the houses had already been occupied. Houses had already been emptied and left unoccupied, and the large proportion of the population was extremely disaffected, except a small section of notorious housebreakers. Namely, two of them were very prominent: Nana Bhai Dinshaw Daruwala and Tayyab Ali Ali Bhai, who would break into homes temporarily vacated by the plague to sort of rob. They're called professional homebreakers, and it is 10 years after they started their operations in 1907, 1908, they were finally apprehended by the police. Okay, that aside, now as far as the administration was concerned, the action slightly slowed down, but it did not stem one consequence, which was migration. Migration out of Bombay, for not so much for economic reasons, because like I said, in the 1890s, areas like Ratnagiri and all the Konkan belt was in the throes of famine, so people had moved to Bombay. So they had not moved. They were not moving back to these areas for economic reasons. Yes, that is exactly it is a euphemism for manual scavenging, and the word is written together HALALKHOR in English and also in Hindi. Halal khor means is a euphemism for manual scavenging. So these people started migrating. The migration initially started at about 20 odd thousand till October. It rose to almost 2 lakhs in December, and by January 1897, if you remember, the plague was in Bombay diagnosed in September 1896. By 1897, the migration was almost 4 lakhs, which was half of the population of Bombay. Now there were a number of consequences of that. Once the migration started happening and the plague was still not controlled, the government decided that the regulations in place are not strict enough, and the provincial and the state government should be given and central government should be given enough powers should be given enough powers to control the people during the epidemic. We are still not talking about controlling the epidemic because we don't know what the epidemic was or how it spread, so we'd rather control the people. So there was a legislation that was in the books. However, on the 10th of January, an attenuated version of the same microbe that caused the plague, which later on is called Yersinia pestis, after the person who discovered it. The person who discovered it in 1894 in Hong Kong was a person called Alexander Yersin. Yersinia pestis, it was called Yersinia pestis only in the 1940s. Till then, it was called the Pasteurella pestis. But what is in a name? So an attenuated version of the microbe was developed in the lab, again called room 000 in the Grant Medical College in Petit Laboratory, and it was tested first on Halfkind itself. The Halfkind had developed the vaccine, and it was tested on Halfkind. Also, the dean of Grant Medical College and certain other people, again euphemistically referred to as native assistants of Halfkind. They also volunteered, and they were tested. Of course, he did not contract the plague. Later on, he did not contract the plague after the injection, so it might have worked on him. The next port of call was a large-scale testing of who would volunteer for something like this. Though, I mean, given the fact that it was seen as a vaccine for plague people should have, but the fact was that hospitals were till then seen as a place of death where you had plague and you went there and you died, which was actually the most that which was, I mean, with a mortality of 80%, that was a natural reaction. Inoculation again was orange, or vaccination again was looked down upon, because as far as Hindus were concerned, it had live animal matter, which they did not want to use, because the earliest base for the microbes to grow and generate was bouillon, buillon, that is the stock of a meat from a certain animal. um, so of course that was one reason why a lot of Hindus did not easily subscribe to the whole vaccination. A lot of people did not because they're skeptics. Aga Khan, prominent Parsis, prominent Muslim leaders, Christians, they themselves volunteered to inoculate, in order to, actually even the Tatas did, and on account of that, a lot of people from their communities did. Incidentally, Jamshedji Tata, sort of inverted commas, prevailed on his in-law, that is his son's, his daughter-in-law's father, to get himself inoculated. The word used is prevailed on. So all kinds of pressure was sort of done to ensure that more and more people get inoculated. But like I said, that large scale testing was an issue before inoculation happened. So they, by happy coincidence, decided that the Baikula Home of Corrections, which is again a euphemism for the Baikula jail, was a good place where you could get, um, yes, Yersinia pestis, absolutely. It looks like a safety pin under the microscope, used special training method. That is exactly how Dr. Surveyor mentions it. He calls it bipolar, with bipolar and with safe like a safety pin with two ends. That's absolutely right, Rajat. That's what he says. So going ahead, about 146 people were inoculated, and some of course contracted the plague because it's a vaccine and they would have had the plague, bacterium before they vaccinated. But about 38% was the rate of the people who survived after the vaccine from the small population. 19% was the rate of survival of those who did not vaccinate. So when I said a lot of migration was happening out of Bombay, a large part of Bombay, about 80,000 people, were employed in mills. And because of employment, because of the economy, because they wanted to get their salaries, etc., they were the last to migrate, because they needed money and they came from these areas which themselves were not very. Show off, Mr. Microbiologist. Okay, that's. I think you should DM Rajat directly about that. Um, so. Um, so they were the last to migrate. The general average, their population was about 10% of the population of Bombay, and about 12 to 14% of the plague mortalities came from the mill hand. The mill hands started leaving Bombay in the beginning of 1897, and rushing back to their hometowns. This, of course, was a negative consequence because it impacted Bombay. It's 2 million spindles. It's 2 million spindles almost stopped. Its weaving stopped. Units had to reduce production. But there was a positive thing that came out of it. Till till before the plague, there was a surfeit or surplus of workers. So they were at the employer's mercy. So if one left, the other could be appointed. So the employers tried to retain control over them through a mechanism of arrears and credit, in the sense that to retain a worker, he would keep his salary for a month in arrears. Because of the arrears, the worker would go to a shroff or to a money lender to meet expenses, and he would then use the arrears, the payment of arrear. He would use the arrears once paid to him to pay the money lender. So at any point of time, either the work, why either? At any point of time, number one, the worker was waiting for his arrears, and secondly, I was holding back for the history boys have taken off and okay. So the workers were number one waiting for their arrears all the time, and secondly trying to repay off the loan that they had taken to meet their expenses. So they were stuck in this arrear credit trap, and the plague almost alleviated because with the fall in the workers, jobbers, that is people who are offering employment, who are I mean euphemistically referred to in Kerala as professionals, who would promise you jobs in the Gulf, or manpower consultants. So they were called jobbers at that point in time. So these would promise you day rates, which were I'll come to that, Roger. Okay, so which were the jobbers who would promise day rate, which was an absolutely new thing, because no one would imagine they would be paid by the day, and that they would not be waiting for the arrears. So that was an absolutely new thing, and this created a fluidity in the market. And for the first time, the fluidity worked for the worker. Now you are asking me whether prohibitory measures restricted to residential areas only. Actually, not even residential areas. The areas which the English decided were unhealthy, unsanitary, unsafe, which means areas which they thought were crowded, which were actually populated by people who were not from the upper classes. So there was no lockdown in the mills, of course, because why lockdown in the mills? The ships out of British Bombay were moving out to ports in Europe. It was just that the ports in Europe in due time put sanctions on these ships coming into their ports, and that is the only reason why the commercial activity took a big hit. Otherwise, Britishers were happily exporting stuff. Their ships were going, their factories were running. So the reason why the factory started shutting down was okay, if there was a migration from, why don't we see? Yes, the migration from Bombay happened, and it went to places like Solapur or Ratnagiri, etc., Pune, and yes, there was plague in those areas. There was plague in Punjab, because when you talk about Bombay, not the city but the province, Karachi and all was within within its sway. So from Karachi it moved to Punjab, undivided Punjab, that is both Indian and Pakistan Punjab. To the United Provinces, there are some in Calcutta, but mostly the eastern and southern sides escaped it on account of the fact that large-scale migration was from the Bombay Presidency to Bombay Presidency. Now I just lost my stream of thought. Okay, so the employees, the workers had for the first time in their lives fluidity as far as their wages were concerned, and they started on a day wage thing, which was very important. Industrial relations changed like that. But like all things, this was to come to an end, because by September, by July, August, and by July, August 1897, the plague had tapered off, thanks to, within inverted commas, the British Plague Commission and their activities, like I start off by saying, like throwing things out and burning furniture in the house and using the perchloride of mercury, etc., etc. So I mean, so people started coming back, and workers started coming back on the hope that they would get high wages. Now by this time, the employers again. Okay, what was the role of the Hakims? I will come to that later on, Simi. So employers once again regained the upper hand. But what happened in the meantime was that workers had become more organized, because they saw that they had a flexibility as far as wages were concerned. Their position was slightly stronger, and there was a demand for workers. So workers began to unionize, and this was, I mean, we could see the nascent beginning of Indian workers' unions, collective bargaining, etc., in the plague. Now, on the supply side, the mill owners knew that another plague or any other thing would happen, and the workers would again go away. So they had to ensure something about safety and security of workers. The arrear system had gone now. So how many deaths were reported between 97 and 1910, 10 million deaths in India. Oh yeah, okay, Ashwin, I get your point. I will take the question later. So, so what happened was that the mill owners now decided that before anything like this happens, we should do something to ensure that we have a supply of workers. Jamshedji Tata decided that because the north of India, north of Nagpur, central provinces, United Provinces, there was a problem with land and labor, in the sense that there was a lot of landless labor who were surplus, and they would come and work in Bombay if they were called here, and if they were promised wages that were not even, I mean, that were half or less than what they were paying the people from Konkan. This was twice, the government intervention was twice sought in the early 1890s, but finally in 1897, the government warmed up to the suggestion. Of course, agents were sent, but it was not very successful. About 172 mill workers, 172 people came from these areas to work in Bombay at that point in time. The other measure that a mill owner, that's Wadia, thought was to ensure a more welfare kind of economy, where mills had stocked provisions, etc., which workers would be sold at concessional rates. Workers would accommodation would be given to workers close to mills, which was the basis of what later was what we now see as BIT chawls, or the Bombay Improvement Trust chawls. The welfare basis for the same comes from the suggestion by Wadia. Of course, the suggestion by Wadia in 1898 were implemented by the Bombay Improvement Trust, or the Bombay City Improvement Trust, in the years to come, but we'll progress to that. So at this point in time, plague tapered off, like I said, in the spring, or or during the summer of 1897. But come winter, and it again started. And all the success that was attributed to the Plague Commission was seen as a sham, because it was just nature taking its course. As of now, we did not have the reason for the plague. We did not have the cause for why it was so communicable. We did not have a vaccine whose efficacy was proven beyond doubt, and we did not have a cure that was tested on a large number of people. The first question, where did it come from? Where did it go? Unanswered. Second question, how was it communicable? They said rats. Hankin assiduously tried to go through areas such as Mandavi, Paidhoni, Kamatipura, to see the movement of rats and how the rats had moved and how the plague had migrated, but he could not conclusively prove what the connection between rats and plague was, because of course there was a connect that he knew, but he couldn't prove the connect. It is it is a few years later that the rat flea is seen as the one that caused the plague, but later on that, more later. So about this time, there was an act that came into force. The act was called the Epidemics Act. In short, it was the Act of 1897. Now I'll just read out a section of the act. Okay. Now in 1897, the act came into force. The act was also based on the same premise that if we can control Indians, we can control the disease. Why did I say Indians? Because there is a lot of bias happening. Like I started off initially by saying that there was a bias between the older doctors and the newer doctors as far as germ is concerned. There was a disagreement between British doctors and Indian doctors. There was rather a bias. Doctors like Bahadurji, who were extremely well qualified and who were appointed as professors of pharmacology, etc., in Grand Medical College, were actually thrown out of their posts by the Britishers, who were a part of what is called the Indian Medical Service, the IMS, which was actually the British military Indian Medical Service. In addition to that, there was a bias between Englishmen and Indians, in the sense that it was felt that Englishmen would not catch the plague. It was the Indians who would catch the plague. Interestingly, when Yersin was trying to discover the bacillus, he was not given access to patients, to corpses, to cadavers, etc. In 1894 in Hong Kong, till he went up to the governor and told them that an English soldier and an English woman were afflicted by the plague and were segregated in a plague ship. Till then, the governor, till then, he was not allowed access to anything to collect samples, and his collection of sample was directly related to him going to the governor and telling them that it had affected Englishmen. The same thing happened in Bombay, that the reaction was based on the premise that it's only Indians we have to control, and secondly, the reaction was late because they felt that anyway it's the Indians who are dying of plague, not the Britishers. So these are two reasons why this thing came. So therefore, the foundation of the Epidemics Diseases Act was also based on the same. So it's one of the shortest acts that you would see in India. 123 years since it was first promulgated, it is still in existence. It has 4 sections. Section 1 will tell you the title and the extent, that is the name, and the coverage. The second will tell you, the second section provides for powers to provincial and central government officers to pass notification to combat the dangerous epidemic disease. Third is the penalties or the punishment for people who did not follow the regulations passed under this act. And the fourth section, the last section of the act, was about protecting the public officers who enforce the act. So 4 sections in this act, nothing else. So it is like an executive act, it is like a guideline without any clear specification about what is to be done. Secondly, the plague is a public health issue. The act is a policing act, right? So while policing is important, like for example, when you talk about cyclones, etc., policing is important, but there is like in plague and all, there is also public health aspect. There was no public health aspect to the act. There was nothing about research into the plague. There was nothing about medical improvements. Of course, the British would set up from time to time plague committees and plague commissions, which they thought was enough, who also tried to implement the same act. So that is one thing. First of all, it was a police act. There was no public health angle to it. Secondly, it was about the powers of the government, not responsibilities. So you could not challenge arbitrariness. You could not challenge excesses, because the basis of the law is that it has to be fair both from a substantive point of view, that is a word, and from the procedural point of view, that is how it is implemented. So notification under the people would notification would be passed by local authorities under this act. I will put up the Pune notification later on, which will tell you how they look like, and they were hardly beneficial. Then it did not take into effect the rights of the people, their interests, their needs, their social backgrounds. Nothing. This was just imposed from above. Now, while the act should have equal application on everybody, there were exemptions. For instance, once in June and July, once the plague started tapering off, people started coming to Bombay in ships. They were still segregated. The richer people and the poorer people were segregated into two different segregation camps. The richer went to Nariyalwadi. In addition to that, they were supposed to be in quarantine for 10 days. After 2 days, they were allowed. The richer ones were allowed to leave. If not richer ones, everybody was allowed to leave if they could provide a guarantor for them, and secondly, they could give a photograph of theirs to the government. Now, a photograph of theirs, photograph of a person, even in the worst place, could cost about 5 rupees. After the increase in daily wage, a Mumbai mill hand would get about 8 annas or 9 annas in a day. So a photograph was really out of the picture, literally. They would not get a guarantor. So who would get a guarantor, and who would get the photograph? The richer people in the segregation camps. So while the law applied equally to all, the result was not equal. So the richer people would move out of the camps, and then they would breach the quarantine, of course, because they're already submitted a photograph. And then what happened was that the people who moved out of the camps, the more richer ones, also caught this, especially when they were living in larger mansions. There was a lower density they also caught it. So now what did the government do? So Campbell, who was heading the Plague Commission, again blamed on the poor. This time not the poor of Bombay, because 9/10 of Bombay was disinfected, bleached, clean. There was enough mercury to even prevent diseases like syphilis in the air. So, I mean, it was that Bombay is supposed to be that clean. So then he said, of course, the people coming back from Solapur and Ratnagiri and the Konkan, who had gone earlier and coming back, they are getting the plague. So it was it was it was aimed at the, or sorry, the bias between the rich and the poor was at the fore of this, or what was at the base of all the legislations. Another thing was that once the act came into force, inspection of railway stations started. So people getting out of third class compartments would be asked to strip and disrobe to check for their groins for swellings, swollen lymph nodes, etc. People in the second class were checked in the privacy of their cab, privacy of the train, and the first class were not even checked. And the first class were actually at that point in time only Britishers. So again, there's a difference between the rich and the poor. Then the relief that was provided was rather painful. They were first asked, people were, that's men, women, and children, were asked to walk 10 miles to ensure that they were healthy. If they didn't collapse, then they were healthy. And then they were put into road construction projects, which were meant to, and then they were paid for those road construction projects. So actually, you tired them out. And as Campbell's diaries, Campbell was the head of the Plague Commission, his Campbell's diaries later point out, his motivation was to tire them so much, that they will not spread disaffection. Now, there are so many of these classes amongst whom disaffection was spread. Now, where they were channeled against the British administration, of course, they were channeled against the British doctors who went along with the plague officers from house to house. I had said earlier that the Arthur Road Hospital was subject to stone pelting. The doctor there was an Indian called Chinoy. So yes, to a certain extent, there was a lot of resentment against doctors also at that point in time. So it is at such a volatile, such a volatile time that the research into plague is going on, and the Plague Commission, which is supposed to look into the research, cannot comprehensively or conclusively comment on whether Halfkine's vaccine has its efficacy. Then there is a serum developed by an Italian in Florence called Lustig serum, which is used extensively in the Arthur Road Hospital by Dr. Chinoy, clinician, who is forced, because of the Plague Commission strictures, to only use it on half his plague patients to ensure that he has a correct sample according to the Plague Commission, and he does it reluctantly to study whether the serum works on one part of the population which has been given no serum and the other which has. So he finds out that mortality exceeds 90% in the people who've not been given the serum, which was available with the British and with them, and the serum was given free of cost, and the mortality was brought down to 52% in the people who were given the serum. So you again see a sort of a bias, that people have been denied the serum so that the commission can conclusively prove whether or not the serum is a cure. Of course, it does not conclusively prove it. So the commission that sat on 4 questions, the Plague Commission, whether how did the plague come to India, how did it spread, is the vaccine safe, is the serum safe, it answered none of that in 1898. All this was leading to a lot of pent-up resentment. And just before this, sometime in June, 2 people are shot dead in Pune. Pune, I'm not talking about the Bombay city anymore. Pune, 2 people are shot dead. One is the Plague Commissioner, that is William Rand, and the other is his military attaché, Lieutenant Ayerst. Now, why did this happen? I'll be posting the Pune notification to tell you what were the steps that were taken. They were assassinated by by the brothers called the Chapekar brothers. There is, in case you want to know more about the Chapekars, of course, the Bombay government has the autobiography of Chapekar and his confession on its website. Z5 had a Marathi movie come out called Gondhya Alare, which was the signal that they had used in the assassination. And there is an excellent 1977-78 movie by Jayu Patwardhan called 22nd June 1987. 1897. That was the date of the assassination. So there were these 3 Chapekar brothers who were Harikatha Vachaks, who were itinerant, who traveled with their father spreading Harikatha. So the eldest among them, called Damodar Hari or Damodar Hari Chapekar, was pained by what was happening in Pune. The police were entering people's houses without permission. The parda of the women were violated. They were subject to all kinds of torture. The aged were beaten up. Temples were being destroyed. So there was a lot of rumor. The rumor mill was also spinning over time. So, but then the fact at the end of the day was that the administrative power with the administrative machinery was and the restrictions and oppressions that they that played on during the plague, or rather the segregation, etc., was much more than what was warranted, and this led to the assassination of Ayers. So when Ayers on 22nd of June 1897 was coming from the government house, which is now in the Savitri, with the main building of the Savitri Bai Phule Hospital, Savitri Bai Phule University in Pune, when he was coming out of the government house, he was assassinated in a place called Ganesh Khind by Damodar Hari and heirs by his brother Bal Hari. Damodar Hari was caught on the because the police informers, the Dravid brothers, gave information, and Dravid brothers were promptly dispatched by Damodar Hari and Balkrishna Hari's brother Vasudev Hari. Yes, Ashwin, Chapekars were responsible. Actually, Damodar Chapekar talks about throwing pitch tar on the face of Queen Victoria statue near the fort. It was actually later on repaired at a huge cost by the Maharaja of Baroda. The Chapekars actually were the three brothers, Damodar Hari, Vasudev Hari, and Balkrishna Hari. They were, like I said, Ram Katha Vachaks, or they went from village to village reading out the Ram Katha. They were from a village near Pune, now in Pune, called Chiswad. So what they did was that they assassinated Ayerst and Rand. Rand was the plague commissioner. Ayerst was the military attaché. But in the background of their actions and their arrest and eventual hanging, there was one other person who was put on trial. This person was put on trial under section 124A, which is sedition of the Indian Penal Code, and his name was Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Why was Bal Gangadhar Tilak on trial? Because Bal Gangadhar Tilak, though initially was a supporter of, along with Agar, was a supporter of the plague measures, but when he saw its implementation, and then when he saw the reaction of the people, he was aghast and he was pained, and then he could not. He started an active campaign against it. On 15th of June, that is 7 days before the Chapekar brothers, on 15th of June 1897, he wrote in his paper. There was a report published in his paper Kesari about his speech given at the anniversary celebration of Shivaji's coronation. So in the speech, he justifies Shivaji's killing of Afzal Khan, by saying that what Shivaji had done was right according to the Bhagavad Gita, because the Bhagavad Gita says that the Krishna rather says that you can kill your gurus and your relatives as long as it is not for personal gain. And Shivaji's killing of Afzal Khan was for the populace at large. It was not to feed, in the words of Tilak, the cavity in his stomach. And therefore, people today should not look at the Indian Penal Code, but for their actions, and to justify their actions, they should look at the Bhagavad Gita. The Britishers, immediately after the assassination of Rand and Chapekar, Rand and Ayerst by the Chapekar brothers, immediately pounced on Tilak, because because they believed it was his writing, his article, there was also a poem published where Shivaji lamented the famine, the plague, and everything, and said that how are we so helpless? So both of these were seen as leading directly to the killing of the plague commissioner and the lieutenant. Shivaji's trial Lokmanya Tilak's trial happened in the Bombay High Court. It was by jury, and 6-3 they ruled for imprisonment, and he was sentenced to an 18-month imprisonment. The judge interpreted sedition quite liberally in India. In England, about about 60 years before this incident, in England, sedition was already defined as something which led to, a violent any statement, anything else that led to violent upsurge, overthrowing of regime. In India, however, Starchy interpreted it merely as creating disaffection among the people, which he then again defined as being an absence of affection, which means that if you criticize the government as a journalist and spread hate, then it was treason. Now again, his statements were extremely racist. He said because Tilak was addressing not the intelligent people, the Parsis, the educated and more philosophical Hindus, but the people of Konkan. So he was paternalistic at best, racist at worst when he tried to interpret. And of course, Tilak was sentenced and spent time in jail, and to a huge amount of condemnation both within India and the UK. What it did was it strengthened the bedrock of what later came to be extremism in India. And later on, all of us at some point of time have heard the three names Lal, Bal, Pal. So the basis of or the root of extremist movement, or one of its root branches, came from the trial of Tilak, because Starchy, of course, was favorably disposed to the educated Parsis, the more philosophical and knowledgeable Hindus, who, in the eyes of the people, were the moderates. What does this trial do? It criminalizes dissent. Our constitutionalists and moderates till then their actions were based on the fact that the English rule is essentially fair. They will listen to you if you spoke to them. And now, when Tilak spoke out, he was thrown in jail. So they realized that the moderates were no longer the people to be followed, and extremism was the option going forward. So it actually created a groundswell of support for extremism. So that is what happened. In the meanwhile, winter happened in Bombay, and then 1998 was worse than 1997. But to a great extent, the inoculations increased. And the serum was also used, though credit was given neither to Lustig nor to Afghan at that point of time by the Plague Commission, because the Plague Commission also appointed another person over Afghan as the director of the serum of the Plague Research Institute. Now, as far as we've still not discovered how the plague was spread from people to was spread till about 5 years later, when a French scientist discovered the presence of certain fleas on the rats, and the fleas moved from rat to to man, and then man to man. So this was, the research, of course, was quite assiduously painful, because in the sense that they had to first eliminate the rat level, and then at the level of the man, and then see if there were tick bites on the persons who were dead. And then they said that a plague policy has to be comprehensive, control the pests within, control the fleas on the rats, and then the transmission from man to man. So washing of hands, disinfection of homes, destruction of property, leaching, use of perchlor, all of that came to a naught, because in live experiments it was found that within a month of bleaching of houses and use of perchlorate of mercury, fleas were back there. The study was conducted quite accidentally at the Bombay Zoo, which saw the death of guinea pigs due to fleas. Okay, so now now that the plague inoculation had started happening, and the serum had started more wide. The serum had started gaining more widespread currency. The what is now called the Afghan Institute started producing plague vaccines almost at a factory, almost at the rate of a factory. Aga Khan provided both his house and financial support of it. In 1899, the Afghan Institute moved to its current position in the government house in Parel. Earlier, it was in the Petit laboratory in the Grant Medical College, which is now the pharmacology lab, pharmacology class for second year medical students at the Grant Medical College. So then the Afghan Institute moved to the Government House in 1899, and as of today, it is a Maharashtra state public sector undertaking. So, and then the lake goes on until 1910. We have about 10 million deaths. The population of Bombay started at the beginning in 1891 was about 8 lakhs, and it almost reduced to half at various points of time because of the migration and the deaths in Bombay, both the presidency as well as the Bombay city. So in the now in 1898, the government decided, of course, even after Hafkine and Hamkin and Yersin had proven that it was a bacillus, they still went ahead and decided that sanitary conditions, overcrowdedness, etc., the cause of the plague. And on December 8th, on December 8th, 1898, by a legislation, the Bombay City Improvement Trust was formed to improve the city of Bombay to improve the city of Bombay. Now, I'll answer this one question because it's important and I forgot about it. There were disease outbreaks, particularly cholera in British India, where any legislative measure undertaken then to the answer to that is plain and simple. Legislatively, no, but then the current epidemic disease act could be used for any of those, and that was the fear amongst people of India, that every time you had an epidemic, whether it was cholera or smallpox, both of which is very common, or a rare polio, the government could actually use regulations under the existing epidemic disease act and to do all those things that they did during the Maharashtra plague. But going forward, uh, the bacillus, of course, the government, in spite of what people told them, but what researchers said, the government still believed in sanitary conditions. They said that they set up the Bombay City Improvement Trust. The Bombay City Improvement Trust's initial thrust was two-pronged. They had to, first of all, create avenues all along the city, so the central and the eastern side would benefit from the air coming from the sea. Uh, why would they need that? The reason why they needed this was because at that point of time, all along the city, between the city and the all along the sea, between the city and the sea, there was a lush growth of coconut and toddy palms, and they obstructed the wind coming from the sea. More importantly, these coconut and toddy palms used dried fish as the manure. So these noxious fumes that the manure itself let out. So first of all, there was hardly any breeze coming from that side because coconut and toddy were blocking them. But whenever wind came, it brought about the noxious smell of dried fish, which of course the English hated. So they decided that the best way to do it is to create avenues which will free the sea air and which will, by an oblique way, cut down the trees that were the cause of the noxious smell. Now, the people who populate that areas were coolies, who were the fisher folk, were bhandaris, who were toddy tappers. So these people had hereditary land rights, and with the coming of the British, they were also paying taxes. So they refused to get out of those places, and there was a huge movement, huge uproar against that. In the meantime, the Bombay City Improvement Trust also started a number of schemes, 33 in total, out of which scheme 5 and 6 are important. 5 and 6 provide the basis for the decongestion of the city. There are two things that BCIT was supposed to do. Number one, to create avenues all along the city, so the sea breeze would come in, and secondly, to decongest the city by moving residential accommodation to the Mahim Island. So BCIT under scheme 5 and 6 proposed to develop Sion, Dadar East, and Matunga as residential areas, and of course the coolies and the coolies and the bhandaris again started their struggle, and then it delayed, and in 1915 there were resolutions passed with respect to protection of their rights, and they said that alternative Mahim woods, the Mahim forest, should be developed. And as a compromise, what came into existence was what is called the Shivaji Park Mahim scheme, which led to the first planned, first large-scale planned settlement in Bombay in the 21st century, in the 20th century. So that is how Shivaji Park and Dadar came into existence. Now, interestingly, the Bombay City Improvement Trust was created by legislation, but there was also a Bombay municipality. Now, municipality started when they came up with the plans and the infrastructure and everything. Municipality started flexing its muscles, because while the Bombay City Improvement Trust, the Bombay Improvement Trust was by legislation, the municipality had landowners who had stake of land in these areas. So then a compromise was reached again, as always, and the BCIT would develop infrastructure, that is lighting, water, sewage, etc. And the open areas and the selling of plots would be in the hands of the Mumbai, or would be in the hands of the municipality. So that was the compromise reached. So there are two things that the BCIT did: the north and the south, the creation of avenues, that is the drawing of roads connecting all these areas. The east-west road was called the Princess Road, or now the Samaldas Gandhi Road, and the north-south avenue, the north-south road, was called the Sindham Road, or the Muhammad Ali Road. So that is how it was done. That is how they did. They created avenues, they created residential areas. And number three, I had spoken earlier about the Wadias trying to develop areas near their mills for residential accommodation for residential accommodation for the mill workers. So that is how the chawls, the chawls presently, the 3-4 floor structure that you've seen in movies like Vastav, etc., came into existence. There are still about, correct me if I'm wrong, Ashwini, 130 BIT chawls still in existence in and around Bombay. So that is that also came into existence there. Initially, the idea came from Wadia, but the Bombay Improvement Trust, the Bombay City Improvement Trust, executed that and gave and led to that. So that was one of the consequences of the plague in Bombay. The plague in Bombay. This is something that this is specifically for Rohan Not. For all of you, but Rohan Nautiyal, because Rohan Nautiyal keeps posting postcards. So postcards played a very, very interesting role in the post-plague period in Bombay. The postcards were manufactured by, just a minute, I don't know by. Okay, the postcards were manufactured by a person called Harry Saudi, the owner of Clifton Company, which showed large town sounds so similar. Town. Town is the Arabic or the Urdu word for it. So I don't think it is anything to do. It's town. Okay, sorry. So the postcards were manufactured by a person called Harry Saudi, the owner of Clifton and Co. He would take photographs of sanitized hospitals where one person was lying in each bed, the nurses taking care of them, where British doctors were present, British doctors inoculating Indians who were all scrawny, pot-bellied, malnutrition, and the British doctor bravely taking up the cause of these people. So these were intended to be sent to other places outside India to ensure that the Raj is shown in good light, is what it said. This is an article that I found in Scroll. The article was about a review of Omar Khan's Paper Jewels postcard from the Raj. I've also posted the source initially. So this is something that I found in Scroll. I could not find this anywhere else. I could not find this whole roll of postcards anywhere else. What else? As far as Hafkin was concerned, he enjoyed some sort of success the world over till in 1902. Till in 1902, the Hafkin Institute supplied vaccines to a place called Mulkowal in Punjab, Pakistan. Now, of the 107 people inoculated, 19 died, and the problem was traced to a sample called N53, which was infected with tetanus. Of course, there was like everything else, there was another commission which investigated, Halfkind was found to be negligent because that sample originated from his laboratory. They had also said that he had deviated from the formula he submitted and which was approved by the Plague Commission. So therefore, he was at fault. He was removed from the directorship, and then he went off to England in ignominy. Till 1906, the deliberations of the commission were published, and it was noticed that the contamination occurred not at the time of the opening of the bottle or before, but after that, because one of the assistants or the compounders used a contaminated forceps to open it and used it for injection. So that is how, but this was never taken into consideration by the Plague Commission. Of course, the Lancet, the British Journal of Medicine, the Journal of Tropical Medicine, all of it immediately pounced on it. And Halfkind wrote to a fellow researcher and Nobel Prize winner Roland Ross, who had worked in India on malaria, to support him, which he did. And Halfkind was given an offer to come and again work in India, which he immediately did. He was appointed the director-in-chief of the biological laboratory in Calcutta. But there was a postscript to it. This incident or Mulkoval almost entirely without basis destroyed his credibility, and his employment agreement with the government of India at Calcutta stated very clearly that he would not, while he would do research with respect to biology, he would not do research. He would not produce vaccines. Now he had wanted to come back to India to improve on the cholera vaccine and put an end to it. So that is how it ended for Halfkind in India. The plague continued on till the early 1960s, where the fatalities fell to about 200 in a year. Till about 1910, 1 million people had died. 53 countries the world over. What started in China in 1855 eventually impacted 53 countries in the world. Countries like France, Italy, Spain, etc., had put embargoes on ships traveling from India, and it took a while before commercial activity started on a full scale. So that is a bonus story which is not linked to the plague in Bombay. In the 1930s, there was this zamindar of a place called Pakur. Pakur is now in Jharkhand. He died of plague. Plague had come to Calcutta, and before this, plague had come to Calcutta, but to a village in Jharkhand, a person dying of plague in Jharkhand was slightly irregular, highly irregular rather. And this was a zamindar of Pakur. So so then the police decided to investigate, and then they found that when he had come to Calcutta and was boarding a train, there was a man in a shawl who pricked him, and there was an ooze that came out of the prick, and since then he had fallen ill, and by the time he reached Pakur, he showed full fledged symptoms of plague, and then he eventually died. Now, yes, plague simmered till the 1960s, and finally, by 1960s, cases were restricted to about 100 or 200. So you are right in the sense plague did, and then it again happened in 1994 from 1993-94 from Surat. So then they investigated, and they found that the zamindar's stepbrother was responsible for his death. He had somehow, through a ruse, managed to obtain live plague microbes from Halfkind Institute in Bombay, and inject and get someone to prick his brother with it, resulting in his death. So while the plague affected Bombay, parts of North India, that's undivided Punjab, and United Provinces, some parts of Bengal. There was also this one interesting, albeit sad incident, where a person in a village in present Jharkhand was infected by the plague on purpose and was killed. This is, I mean, there's an interesting book. I'm forgetting the name. It's a Diaries of Calcutta Police. This is one of the cases discussed in those diaries. It is not connected to our discussion, but I thought that this was an interesting aside, so I should share this with you. As far as plague was concerned, on the closing note, there was no conclusive evidence as to where it came from, because people said, of course, it came from Hong Kong, but no dead rats were found on the Hong Kong ship. The sailors were not infected. It was the people at the ports here in India who were affected. The rats died in the rice go downs, in the wheat go downs in these places in the coast. The other interpretation was that it came from Garhwal, because the plague commission found that in Garhwal, plague-like symptoms were endemic since the 1830s. So between 1830 and 1855, there are 17 instances. There are 17 instances of plague, and then interestingly, there is this lady called Cynthia Deshmukh who said that Hankin had traced the line of infection from Garhwal right to Bombay. How? That Naga sadhus had attended the Kumbh in Haridwar. If you remember my last discussion, Naga sadhus, one of the kumbhs that they attend is in Haridwar, and then they walked all the way down to the next kumbh in Nasik, in Trambak. And then they were infected with the plague and they gave it to people in Prague. And coincidentally or interestingly, the second person who was inspected by the doctor who made the first clinical diagnosis of plague, Asayo Vihas, he also had come from Nasik. So there is another postulate which says that the Naga sadhus brought it from Garhwal down to Nasik, and then it was spread to everyone. Hankin, of course, Hankin was the biologist at the British government biologist at Agra. He had given a more detailed reason. He had said that the rodents are especially endemic to forests. Once you cut the forests, as Garhwal, the entire Bhabar region was cut for trees to provide railway sleepers. The rats came out into the villages in semi-urban areas, and from there they spread the plague. So there are these two things, but conclusively, while it was stated conclusively that it was from fleas who lived on rats, we could not identify how it spread to India and to Bombay at that point in time. So that brings an end to my discussion on the plague. Now the questions. I heard the plague simmered till 1960 when it was finally eliminated. Yes, it did. The cases were brought down to about 200 or so. Would it be fair to say pandemics often lead to social civic rife eventually, and that's something we should keep in mind in the COVID scenario? It does lead to social civic strife. We've seen all of this. We've seen mass migration. We've seen protests. We've seen both then and now. So it does lead to it, and that is one of the reasons. Why a policing act alongside a public health act is important. In the 1950s and 1980s, we sort of had a draft act in place which tried to bring both public health and law and order issues together, but that never saw the light of day. Was Garhwal affected by plague as Bombay? Yes, there were large-scale mortalities, not at the same time, but before. But no one had at that point of time attributed it to the plague. So conclusively, we can't use the same conclusively. We can't. We can't conclusively say whether the toll was the same as Bombay, but affected because these were largely rural and forested tracts. We cannot conclusively say how many people were killed in Garhwal, but Garhwal was affected by the plague. Any insight on why the Desi name for disease, town, sound? It's an Arabic Urdu word. I don't know if it has. It's an interesting thought, but I think that it has more to do with the Arabic origin rather than town per se. Sir, you asked me to remind you of my early. Yeah, as far as unsafe for human habitation is concerned, there was no criteria. While you had asked this question, I also decided to go through the plague commission. So there is no criteria as such. There are cases where a single plague case, there is a butcher whose house there was a single plague case. He was hidden under blankets and by his wife, and he was the only case there. After it was cleaned with perchloride of mercury and bleached and whitewashed and washed. Of course, the fire engines were called then to wet the entire premises, everything else burnt. After that, with one person, also the house was declared a UHH. So there was no criteria as to contamination. And as we later found out that contamination in a realistically speaking, continued even after all these things, because within a month of the cleaning and bleaching and sanitizing of the Bombay Zoo, the guinea pigs there died of plague. There are outbreaks of cholera. I've answered this question. The fear was that every time there is an outbreak in India, they would use this law to restrict the independence of the individual. That is how it works. Lal Balpar were called Garam Dal versus Firosha Mehta, etc. were called Naram Dal. Absolutely, the extremists and the moderates. Okay, the Garam Dal. Who are the Chapekars? I answered that question. There were three brothers. Chapekar were also responsible for vandalizing the Queen Victoria statue. Yes, they were. Damodar Chapekar actually wrote about how he threw pitch on the face of the statue. I think I had said this earlier. The statue was repaired by the Maharaja of Baroda Gaikwad at the cost of 2,000 rupees in the 19th century itself. Normally, if there is so much difference in mortality among two study groups, study stopped prematurely. And yes, absolutely, you are correct. That was another noting that of dissension that Dr. Chinoy put in for the plague commission, but he was not heard. He was not heard because it all started when the commission asked him whether he was giving the plague medicine to everybody or whether he was giving it to just few people to study if there was to really study if the medicine was efficacious. So he said that he was giving it to everybody. It was available free of cost. Then he was instructed, and then it continued for quite a bit. After which he himself discontinued the practice without informing the plague commission, much to the annoyance of the plague commission. And he of course discontinued the practice of doing the half, and then he started giving it free of cost to everybody who came to the Arthur Road Hospital. Where doctors or medical health professionals targeted as well. Yes, they were also, like I said, the hospital was targeted, the Arthur Road Hospital was targeted. Ambulances were targeted in the sense that an ambulance carrying plague doctors or a medical attendant along with the policeman were targeted, and the person who was in the ambulance who was being taken to hospital forcibly was freed. Sometimes an ambulance stopped to let trams or something pass. The patient himself would run away. People would hide. People would dispose of patients from their homes, and they would, if they are too old or they were too young, they would dispose them off. They would send the richer families would send them off to their poorer relatives, because of which it was spread to those areas also. The poorer people, of course, abandoned them. There were scenes where people had died on the road with babies sitting next to each other and crying. So these are all accounts that we find from both domestic as well as both Indian as well as foreign doctors, foreign administrators, policemen. How many deaths were reported? 1 million till 1910. Sorry, 10 million till 1910 in all areas, including the Bombay city, Bombay presidency, undivided Punjab, central provinces, United provinces, Calcutta. I says Chandrasekhar Tampi, noted, albeit a little late. What are the roles of Hakims and Vaids and natural medicine in this case? There were some interesting diary notings, especially by Indian doctors. First of all, the prescription that you have of drawing blood using the centipede, that was seen. There were these Hakims who would give medicines. There was this person, I'm forgetting his name, a Savant, who gave free medicines mixed with a bit of brandy, which had brought down the cases. They said the 15 people who were treated by him, about 6 or 7 survived, which was which was almost the same percentage theoretically of people who survived at the uh, at the infectious disease hospital in Arthur Road. 52% was the survival after the serum, but of course the sample size here is much smaller. So if he'd given the medicine to two people and one had survived, the statistic would be 50%, which would be quite large. So Hakims, Dargahs, Ayurvedic Vaids, they all had a field day because of a number of reasons. Uh, One did not want to go to the hospital because everybody believed that the moment you went to the hospital, you died, which is how mortality works in the sense that if 80% people die, they will die whether you keep them at home or in the hospital. But people felt. Then secondly, they felt that live organisms were sent into your body. Beef bouillon was used for producing the base. So because of all of these things, they would not do it. Parda was violated. So they rather would go to these hakim. So they but there is no data on how successful the Hakims were. There is again a diary entry by Dr. Bahadurji about how he went to this Vaid, and he asked him whether everybody, he was from somewhere in Gujarat, and he asked him whether everybody was alive. So he says no, but then anyway people either they don't take them back, so they come here, some go back, some die. So that's how it works. Right? There is no statistics of who came to the Hakim because there is no follow up to this. There's no checkup on that. The Hakim just said they either come here and die or they go away. And people going away is not an indication of them being cured. Spread to Was there a spread to other states also? Yes, I have said that there are. Was there prohibitory measures restricted lockdown areas? Answered. I was holding back on the history was okay. Used to be spotted in UG days. We didn't bother about it. Okay. Show off guinea pigs in jail. Yeah, actually, guinea pig in jail, guinea pig in zoo too, because the whole discovery of fleas as a cause of the plague was a result of guinea pigs dying in Bombay Zoo. Irony of life, karma brought plague, the untouchables are indispensable. Halal course were euphemism, sir. What do you mean? There was no threshold. The famous Cox postulates, Chabuked, father of bacteria, was bleach showered on the people then also. Okay, I will not answer the also part. Yes, bleach was showered on the people. If you Google, I think I have a picture somewhere. This is where people are people are placed in wooden vats and mercury solution, and then bleach is used on them too. So yes, bleach was used then, but I don't know how much and how successfully. Yes, Robert Koch was here, earlier named Plague Research Laboratory. Nothing else works. The public health with Danda, nothing else works. Was the plague caused by rats? Yes, they were caused by no rats bore the fleas. So once the bacillus entered the fleas, it blocked their stomach. So uh, whenever so they would it would block their stomach and then their bite, and then they would be hungry, and their bite would lead to communication from one person to the other. Was the institute Hafkan name was the same Hafkan after whom the institute is named? Yes. The current institute, of course, was the government house. The original institute was in the Petit Laboratory in the JJ in the Grant Medical College, JJ Hospital. Later on, it moved to Aga Khan's home, and then to the government of house in Parel. Our talk recorded. Karwaan audio talks also recorded. Okay, so that is about it, and thank you very much for being a part of this rather long talk. Thanks, Chandra, for the wonderful talk. Hope the current too. Thank you, and fingers crossed. Brandy kills all germs. Wonderful. Brandy was also given at the just to relieve pain and fever at the infectious disease hospital in Arthur Road. That was Garhwal effect. So thank you very much, and thank you.